The contemporary United States stands as the most formidable nation in human history, boasting over 800 military installations and accounting for 37% of worldwide military expenditure. The U.S. has emerged as the leader of an extensive, interconnected global framework that has facilitated an era marked by unparalleled prosperity and minimal conflict. To grasp America's role on the global stage and its significance in contemporary world politics, one must trace back to the nation's inception, to a time when America was not a global power in any meaningful way. In its first 70 years, the United States expanded its territory and influence across North America, ultimately reaching the Pacific Ocean, driven by a wave of expansionism that led to the tragic decimation of the indigenous populations inhabiting the continent. However, early Americans were sharply divided on whether the nation should extend its reach beyond the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans. This issue sparked significant debate following the Civil War, with some leaders, such as post-war Secretary of State Seward, advocating for America to assert itself as a global power. Seward managed to advance a proposal to acquire Alaska from Russia, yet his efforts to purchase Greenland and Iceland, as well as to annex territories in the Caribbean, were thwarted by Congress. This resistance stemmed from a faction of Americans, including many lawmakers, who held strong anti-imperialist views. These individuals expressed concerns about America's deeper involvement in global affairs and the challenges of integrating populations deemed as quote-unquote inferior races. This opposition served as a significant check on the imperialist desire to expand. However, a transformative shift was occurring in the late 1800s that would alter the discourse surrounding American expansionism. The Industrial Revolution sparked remarkable economic growth, necessitating a more centralized government and bureaucracy to effectively manage the burgeoning economy. The federal government saw a significant concentration of power, which facilitated expansionist presidents like William McKinley in their efforts to assert American influence overseas. A pivotal moment occurred in 1898 when President McKinley led the nation into war with Spain over Cuba, despite facing considerable domestic opposition. The burgeoning United States swiftly triumphed over the declining Spanish Empire, resulting in the acquisition of Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines. In the following 2 years, the U.S. would go on to annex the Kingdom of Hawaii, Wake Island, and American Samoa. Shortly thereafter, the U.S. gained control of the Panama Canal Zone and deployed troops to occupy the Dominican Republic, in addition to purchasing the American Virgin Islands. This swift expansion of distant territories established the U.S. as a genuine global power. During this era, America also began leveraging its influence to safeguard its expanding commercial and military interests abroad, installing pro-American governments in regions such as Nicaragua and playing a significant role in international diplomacy concerning Western involvement in China. The events of World War I highlighted the extent of America's growing influence. American intervention not only proved to be a crucial factor in bringing the war to a close, but President Wilson also participated in the Paris Peace Conference that concluded the conflict, striving to shape the peace terms. He led America's most ambitious foreign policy initiative to date, the establishment of the League of Nations, aimed at fostering global peace and cooperation. This league represented a comprehensive attempt to reshape international politics, illustrating the boldness of American foreign policy. However, isolationism remained a powerful sentiment within the United States. Congress ultimately prevented the U.S. from joining the League of Nations, which led to the failure of Wilson's vision. Throughout the Great Depression and the rise of Hitler, the U.S. became increasingly preoccupied with its own regional issues rather than European matters. In the end, America's increasing involvement overseas made it impossible to completely avoid global issues. In East Asia, the expanding Japanese Empire directly threatened American territories and military forces, leading to a conflict between the United States and Japan. This tension reached its peak with the attack on Pearl Harbor, which brought the United States into World War II. World War II would forever change America's role on the global stage. The United States emerged as the only major nation to escape economic devastation during the war, and it was the only country armed with atomic weapons. This unique position allowed it to dictate the terms of peace, with the intention of averting future conflicts. A prime example of this is the establishment of the United Nations. The UN Charter created a framework of international law that forbade wars of conquest, similar to those initiated by the Nazis and the Japanese. It also provided a platform for the international community to address disputes and facilitate resolutions. Through this approach, Americans envisioned that great powers could settle their disagreements through negotiation and legal means instead of warfare. However, while the UN is the most recognized of the post-war organizations, it is not the only one. In a quaint vacation spot in New Hampshire, 730 delegates from all 44 allied nations convened. Their mission? To create a global financial framework that would avert another Great Depression and World War. The resulting Bretton Woods Agreement ultimately laid the foundation for the global financial system, leading to the establishment of the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. By founding these institutions, the United States pledged to engage deeply with global challenges. The complication, however, is that the world's second-largest power, the Soviet Union, had a different perspective. World War II united the democratic West and the communist East against Hitler, but this alliance was not sustainable. The United States perceived Soviet expansion in Eastern Europe and beyond as a direct threat to its vision of a world characterized by free trade and democracy. To a significant extent, socialism has cast a shadow of human regimentation over most nations worldwide, and this shadow is encroaching upon our own freedoms. Concerned about Soviet ambitions towards Western Europe, the U.S. and other European nations established the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, a military alliance designed to prevent Russia from invading other European countries. On a global scale, the U.S. adopted a strategy known as containment, aimed at halting the spread of communism across the globe. This new international conflict required the U.S. to exert influence constantly and everywhere. Rather than dismantling the vast military apparatus created for World War II, the machinery continued to operate largely unchanged. This situation led to two primary outcomes. First, the U.S. found itself forming unexpected alliances with nations such as Saudi Arabia, Israel, and South Korea, viewing each as a defense against communist influence in their respective regions. Second, the U.S. began to intervene, often covertly, in numerous countries to curb Soviet influence. At times, this involved supporting sympathetic dictators, as seen in Iran. At other times, it meant providing rebels with weapons and financial support, as in Afghanistan in 1979 and Nicaragua in 1985. Throughout the Cold War, the U.S. intervened in hundreds of global disputes, resulting in a complex web of alliances, tensions, and relationships in nearly every part of the world. Following the fall of the Berlin Wall, the U.S. had the opportunity to withdraw from this system, cutting ties with its allies and reducing its military size. Although the U.S. did lower military expenditures, much of the military infrastructure and alliances established during the Cold War persisted. Presidents George H.W. Bush and Bill Clinton concluded that it was beneficial for both the United States and the global community for the nation, now recognized as the sole superpower, to persist in its active role in managing international affairs. We ought to be, and we are obligated to be, advocates for peace. NATO, originally established solely as a mechanism to counter the Soviet Union, has remained intact and even expanded, serving as a means to maintain unity among European nations in the absence of the Soviet threat. The support from Washington for nations such as Israel and Japan has remained consistent, ostensibly to avert conflict in their respective regions. The network of alliances and institutions established to maintain peace during the Cold War has become a permanent fixture, as have the American military and political commitments essential for their operation. This framework continues to function today, and no prominent American politician since the Cold War has genuinely advocated for its dismantling, with the possible exception of Donald Trump. Trump has expressed conflicting views regarding these commitments, yet he has consistently maintained that American allies are not contributing sufficiently to their own defense, and he has questioned the merits of free trade. This raises doubts about NATO and even the World Trade Organization. At some juncture, we must acknowledge that it may be more advantageous for Japan to defend itself against the threat posed by North Korea, and frankly, it may be preferable for South Korea to begin its own defense initiatives. As for Saudi Arabia acquiring nuclear weapons, absolutely Saudi Arabia. This represents a significant departure from the prevailing consensus that has shaped U.S. foreign policy since 1945, leaning towards a form of isolationism reminiscent of earlier periods. Therefore, will President Trump implement some of the proposals he made as a candidate and reverse decades of institutional development and alliances? We will soon discover the answer.